members, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's special council meeting. As you know, we are being recorded on video, with Jim's doing all the camera work for us tonight. And as you can see, there is no fire alarm due tonight, and so the procedure is all on the screen above me and on the other wall over there. So, as you know, we proceed out to the main car park to my right, if there is one. Are there any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from councillors Cruz, Hughes, O'Brien, Rose and Shirley.
Thank you very much. Public participation? None. There's no public participation. Interest? Has anybody got any interest that haven't been forwarded to Sandra at all? No. Thank you very much. So now we're on to the item for discussion tonight, which is the waste and recycling contract procurement. Who's going to introduce this? Ash? Steve, I beg your pardon. Steve, please.
Chair, if I might start, then I'll call on my colleagues Ash and Karen to fill in some of the more detailed elements later. Just to remind members, this is, if you like, an important milestone on the process of getting our new waste and recycling service. It's been something like 18 months that the council has been embarked on this process, and in that period we've had something like 7 member workshops and at least 4 full council meetings of it. So thank you for coming with us on what is a very complicated, lengthy but absolutely vital service, and as I'm sure you know better than us, waste and recycling is very important to the council and very important to our residents. We are really proud of our current waste and recycling service at Derbyshire Dales District Council, and I hope you are too. 60% recycling and composting is one of the highest rates in the country, and that's something that all members and the officer team should be proud of. We also have high satisfaction, and it's been our ambition throughout this procurement process to retain that high level recycling and retain that satisfaction. The challenge that we have, as we've mentioned to you many times, is the affordability issue. It's the fact that costs in the world around us have risen significantly over the past 18 months. Working on the procurement in this time, we have with us this evening, as well as officers from the council, we have Nick Hughes-Roberts from Unonia, one of the consultants that have helped us. And we also have Sally, who's the team leader, who is responsible as the authorised officer, is the term, for actually delivering the waste and recycling service. We've also had support from external legal advice, as well as internal, and about 12 officers have been involved. And as you'll appreciate, that resource has taken a lot out of the council in that time. A lot of officer resource has been dedicated over 18 months to this process. So we're very pleased to be at this point. I say we're proud of the current service, we're also proud of the contract that we're putting before you tonight. It improves the service in many respects, even better, but it is with something of a heavy heart that we do have to introduce garden waste charging, and members will appreciate that is because we have to do it, and you as members made that decision back in March, and on the back of a decision in November last year, that you would have to do that reluctantly but necessarily, and that's where we are tonight. I'm now going to call on Ash to give some of the details of the contract, and then Karen's going to cover, as you might expect, the finances.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, members. I'll give a quick overview of the contract that's we're putting forward to members this evening, in the sense that it's essentially the same in the manner in which collections will take place. So we still will have weekly separate food waste collections, we'll have fortnightly recycling collections, and we will have a fortnightly garden waste collection. The difference is that we are recommending that is a chargeable garden waste collection service. Members have already approved that, but we are recommending a sum of £50 as a standard fee, but with the offer of a £35 introduction, a one-off early bird offer for the uptake of a chargeable garden waste service. That service is due to start in April 2021, and the early bird offer will start in September next year and will end at the end of January the following year. This will give the incoming contractor the opportunity to optimise the rounds and understand the uptake of the garden waste service. In addition to that, the changes in the contract are some around social values. So the incoming contractor has given a commitment to reducing carbon emissions throughout the life of the contract, and they'll do that through a number of means. In the main, that'll be through the use of biofuel, hybrid ancillary vehicles within the fleet, and the use of electric bin lifts on vehicles. They've also given a commitment to the use of local businesses for the purchase of fuel, haulage, and equipment and workwear. And they're also going to focus on using local employment, or encouraging local employment, working with schools and colleges. Also, you will see in section 15 of the report, we have emphasised better use of technology. The contractor has committed to doing this through, in the main, what we refer to as in-cab technology. So this is where the crews are undertaking the rounds and the collections, where they identify missed bins or contaminated bins. That information will be logged, which will allow us back at the town hall to give quicker feedback in response to service requests from residents or complaints from residents. It will also help the crews identify which properties are on the garden waste service or other services such as assisted collections. I'll hand over to Karen.
Thanks, Ash. The soft market testing that we did before going into this contract and the information provided by our consultants, suggested that costs were likely to go up as a result of this new contract. There were only a limited number of contractors in a saturated market, and we had to make our bid attractive to try to ensure that we got several bidders. This meant that we had to accept a 70-30 split in terms of risk share for materials prices from recycling, which was always going to increase costs. When the specification was approved in March, members approved a 60-40 split in terms of quality over price. So again, there was always a risk that we wouldn't necessarily accept the lowest bid, as we wanted a quality bid that would deliver the service our residents want. To try to make the contract more affordable in terms of costs, we tried to put some measures in place. So for example, we agreed that the council would lease the depot and then pass that on to the contractor for a peppercorn rent, keeping prices down. And in the same way, we also decided to offer to finance the vehicles rather than the contractor financing them directly and then putting an overhead on top of that. Despite those measures, paragraph 16.6 of the report shows that the overall cost of the contract has come in much higher than we expected. There's a budgetary shortfall of around £700,000 a year. We're proposing that that shortfall should be met mostly by introducing charges for the garden waste service, and with the income that we expect to receive from that, that will reduce the budgetary shortfall down to about £100,000. Members will recall that we currently already have a corporate savings target to save £400,000 a year. So this will be on top of that. The report shows the different options that we looked at for charging for garden waste, and those are in the appendix for members to see. But we're proposing a £50 charge with a £35 charge for year one only if subscribers sign up in a period from September to January.
Thank you very much. We'll move to the floor. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, members might not be surprised I'm going to move straight for the recommendations because, as you've heard from the officers, and I want to thank the officers and in doing so, thank members for turning up at the workshops over this past 18 months. It's been a long journey, and an awful lot of work has been put in by the officers, and they should be credited for that, and indeed should Nick from Unanimously, so thank you for your input there. I think it's important to record the fact that this is one of the most important services this authority provides, and we do and have a high reputation for this service. Euphemistically, members of the public say this authority and all authorities only collect waste, and of course we know we do more than that. But this is a very important contract, and last time round, those of you that were on council, it was a buyer's market, and I think we saved something like £350,000. This time round, it's costing us more than £1 million than expected. So even with the suggested charge, which I fully support, for collecting green waste bins and the early bird charge, this council is still going to lose money on supplying this service, and I think that must be recognised by all members. So, as Steve said, with a heavy heart, we've had to introduce this charge. It works out at only £1 a week, and I think any suggestion that there should be a discount has to be met with the argument that what would it cost for a resident to take their waste to the local recycling facility? It would cost a lot more. So I'm happy to move the recommendations, Chair, on block 1 to 5, and I hope that's supported.
Councillor Hobson.
Chair, I'm happy to support the motion. As has already been said, we've had 18 months of very hard work with members, the council officers and Unanimously team. We've had 7 workshops and 4 council meetings. As Councillor Purdy said, this is vitally important that we get this through for our residents. It's a really important service. It is with a heavy heart that we have to think about charging for green waste. But in this economic climate, we have to be realistic. I'm happy to second the motion.
Councillor Finesse.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I totally support all the recommendations. I've just got a few questions on the £15 reduction, which is down here in recommendation 4. Is that just for the first year, or will it carry forward to future years? That's one question of it. You want to answer that one first?
Thank you, Chair. It is for the first year, Councillor Finesse.
Just for the first year. Second question is, we reckon this is going to bring in nearly £500,000 in revenue. Has that factor of the reduction, has that been factored into that? So does the 500,000 include the reduction, or might it come off that? Because there's like a 30% difference, isn't it?
The table in paragraph 16.6 shows that in the first year of charging, we expect only £475,000 of income, whereas in subsequent years it's 566. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Martin Burford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Like other members, I'd like to congratulate officers on all the hard work they've done over the past 18 months on this project. It's obviously taken up a lot of their time and a lot of effort has gone into it. But I'm afraid I have changed my mind since voting in principle for this service back in, well, I think was it March, earlier this year anyway. I think we are allowed to change our minds in light of additional evidence, as per the EU referendum, for instance, where a lot of people change their minds over a period of time. I think I do regret having to vote against this proposed charge, but I do think it's disproportionate and it's a regressive tax. Any lump sum charge, flat rate charge, is obviously regressive and has a big impact on those with limited means. So if it had been £35, say, I might have supported, and that's what I hoped it was going to be earlier this year, but it's £50 and it seems a step too far to me. I think it's unfair to those of us who compost our food and also garden waste and don't use the food waste caddy system, which is collected every week, which must cost quite a lot for the council actually. And that's used by apparently 33% of people. But I'm staggered actually by the fact that there's 35% contents of the residual bins that's food waste. I can't believe how much food people actually throw away. And that's obviously quite a significant factor. But the other thing about this flat rate charge is I think it's a deterrent to our green agenda, and I think we are supposed to be able to set up a climate change working party. I think that's most important. I think we've got to encourage recycling and not encourage fly tipping, which, despite officers' assurances, I'm pretty certain is going to increase, because I've seen it close to where we live before the green bins came in. There was a lot of fly tipping of garden waste on district council land, actually, and that's been minimal since the green bins were introduced. And the other thing is garden fires. I think a lot of people will, if they've got a significant sized garden, they will have garden fires. And I think the cost of clearing that's got to be a factor that needs to be taken into account, because obviously councils will be reporting these problems to officers, and the council will be forced to remove fly tipping of this waste from land that they control. I think the other problem could be inter-neighbour disputes and abuse, and I think in the questions in our session earlier, there were quite a lot of issues that weren't addressed. For instance, those on green bags and how the stickers are going to be applied to those, and I think a lot of details need to be worked out and publicised, especially with parish councils who are going to be asking these crucial questions. I think the system is going to require quite a lot of bureaucracy. It could be quite complex in terms of applying the stickers and controlling those, monitoring those. So I think a council tax increase is far more progressive, and that's something which local authorities should countenance. So I'd like to actually propose an amendment to item 4, namely that the cost of the garden waste collection be achieved by an increase in council tax, and the proposed increase to be the subject of a referendum of all households in due course. So it's with a heavy heart I do propose this, but I think it is...
So I think, Martin, could we have Alexandra just explain exactly what the amendment is?
An amendment, Chair, needs to be the addition or deletion of words that doesn't negate the principle of the recommendation. The principle of this recommendation to me is about the garden waste subscription fee. So a valid amendment would be something higher or lower, but it can't introduce a new principle, which is to increase council tax. That wouldn't be in accordance with the Constitution, because it's your ruling, Chair.
We've got to play by the rules. So if your amendment is to do as Sandra suggests, Councillor Burford, then that's fine. So what would you like to do?
Well, I think it's got to be a progressive increase, a progressive tax, and that's council tax, and therefore I shall be forced to vote against the resolution.
Okay, so there's no amendment. Okay. No amendment at present. Ash,
Thanks, Burton. Did you want to say anything about the, I think part of Councillor Burford's thing was about education and food waste. In this proposal, there is an education officer.
There is, Chair. We currently already have a recycling advisor who works with families and individuals to encourage greater recycling or to help understand what can be recycled and what cannot. In addition to that, as part of this contract, we factored in a cost of an education officer, and that person will work with schools and community groups to increase recycling, not just in terms of garden waste, but you quite rightly touched on the point about food waste being placed in residual bins. We want to reduce that amount significantly, and that's what the person will be working towards doing.
thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just echo the comments that have been made before, congratulating the officers, because it has been a very long and arduous process, and I thank the officers for all their work and their tenacity of sticking with this and producing, I think, a very laudable result, despite our anxieties and concerns over the garden waste issue. I'd like to ask some questions, if I may, because I think a subject of this nature and this report needs to be fully examined.
We did have an hour beforehand, but I know you missed it.
I know, but that's because I was at a very intensive meeting yesterday with the waste contract panel, and very fruitful it was indeed. And I just thought the workshop would be a repeat of what I've previously been hearing. That's the reason for my absence. But can I start with Steve, and then my other questions really relate to the financial aspects, so over to Karen. Steve, if I may start with you. Do you think it's unfair to assume that the proposal to reduce the volume of green waste recycling by 27% will result in a corresponding increase in roadside dumping? And what has been the feedback either from our benchmark authorities or the 120, 150 authorities across the UK that have already introduced this measure?
Chairman, yes, I'm happy to answer Councillor Ratcliffe, and that's a concern that's been raised by members at various points throughout this process, and it is an important one. And he's right, we are expecting that the tonnage of garden waste will initially decrease by 27%. Just to add, though, we are expecting it will gradually creep up over the following years as more people join the service. So that will be, if you like, the worst reduction. In future years, it will be less than that. The modelling that our colleagues in Eunomia have done for us has been very helpful in this regard. They've looked at other councils where garden waste charges have been introduced. They've made sure they've compared us with councils that had free garden waste moving to chargeable garden waste, not just councils that introduced chargeable service from nothing before, so it's comparable in that sense. And they've also compared us with rural district councils, not London boroughs, for instance. So they've done a useful piece of work in that regard. And what their modelling indicates is that, yes, most of the tonnage, in this case, 73%, will be taken up by the new service, but some of it won't be, that 27%. The modelling suggests that a proportion of that, the largest proportion, will actually go to household waste recycling centres, i.e. to the tips that the county council run, where people can free of charge take their garden waste. Another large proportion will go to home composting. Everyone has, and you know, in the past probably did, have the ability to do home composting of garden waste, and that's in many ways the most convenient and in some respects most environmentally friendly way that people can deal with their waste if they don't wish to buy the service. It's possible that a small amount might go into the residual waste bin. We're aware of that. We can't deny that won't be a possibility, but a small amount will. It's predicted, though, that will only be a small amount. And we will, with the support of our contractor, be periodically checking those amounts to ensure that doesn't creep up. But so the household waste recycling centres, home composting will be the main sources for that extra tonnage. But as we've said, the majority of the waste we predict will be going into the paid-for service, and we predict that volume will increase over the years.
Very full answer, Steve. Thank you for that. My next question might actually be more pertinent for you, Sandra, and that is, I heard yesterday from Karen, our finance officer, that should we wish to offset the costs that are proposed to be recovered from charging for green waste collection, go on to the council tax, it might result in an increase over the present 2.9% of a further 9%. Legally, we would be bound to have a referendum. Referendums, incidentally, seem to be the political topic of conversation, don't they? Or have been over the last few months or so. Is it correct in assuming that we would have to carry out a referendum year on year during the life of this contract, should we need to be continuing with this method of income retrieval?
Sandra.
It's certainly my understanding that there's a limit set annually for any increases in the council tax, which will be subject to the referendum. So in the first year, you would definitely need one. based on the current thresholds. That would cost about £101,000. It would take approximately 35 days to get started, so you'd need to bear that in mind. And there's only, to my knowledge, been one council tax referendum since time began. That was in 2015, and it lost.
To you, Karen, if I may, the predicted income from garden waste charging is said to be, on average, about 550,000 per annum. And yet I'm reading that 122,000 might be needed to actually administer that income. That seems to me, at first sight, perhaps a slightly unreasonable figure. What accounts for such a high percentage?
Karen.
The costs that make up the £122,500 that I quoted are £25,000 for marketing, £16,500 towards an additional recycling officer that would help to check garden waste wasn't being put in residual bins and to educate people. £70,000 towards the cost of the CRM system that would help to administer the garden waste service, and £11,000 for payment card transaction fees that the banks would charge us for taking for the payments. I should add that the CRM system, although it will be used to implement the charges for garden waste, it will also be used to administer the contract as a whole. So it will enable staff here to see, if bins have been collected, if residents have made complaints, and so on.
And is this expected to be year-on-year administrative cost, or will it decrease as the service beds in?
Those are averaged out over the life of the contract.
Chair, I don't know if we are going to move to debate, but I will...
No, carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a statement.
Do you want to push your thing on?
I'd like to make a statement, as it were, Chair, if we're moving to a debate.
Yeah, carry on.
Right. Well, I have to say straight away that I am disappointed that this council should have been pushed towards introducing the charge, and I think that will be reflected perhaps in some of the other opposition members' comments and thoughts. And I sympathise with those residents, even if they are possibly going to be a fairly small number, who will see this as yet another burden on their household budget. It's very easy for people like myself who are retired and on a relatively good pension not to feel the cumulative weight of charges that keep coming along in one form or another. So it's all right to say it's only £1 a week, but it's £1 a week being added to something else that then mounts up. So I have thoughts about that. However, I know that this council has ended up in this position through no fault of its own, certainly not of its handling of its year-on-year budgets and its financial management. We're in this position because of a government that decided to start cutting local authority grants and did it year on to year to such an extent that we have lost something like 45 to 50% of our income over the last 8 to 10 years. That's why we've reached this position. We have a statutory responsibility to provide this service. So there's no getting out of that. It's just a matter of how can we pay for it. And unfortunately, circumstances that have been laid out at length, I have to say, by the Waste Management Panel, if I can call them that, have shown that the costs now are such that the only way is either to draw from reserves or cut the finances somewhere else. I would rather, you know, that it is perhaps brought in from a discretionary service like green waste. So it is with something of a heavy heart that I'm going to support this, but I have to say that my vote in essence is in support of the really hard-working officers who have been caught in this financial cleft stick, if you like, but and have attempted, and I think successfully, to provide residents of Derbyshire Dales with a decent statutory waste collection service. Charging for the discretionary waste element may not be what we want at the end of the day, but I think the blame for it lies outside this council chamber. We should not be blaming ourselves for something that I think, unfortunately, is unavoidable.
Thank you very much. I've got 17 speakers, so we've got lots of talking to go. So if please bear with me, there's a long list soon, I'm afraid. So next one up, Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. I've been a councillor for 8 years now, and I'm constantly impressed how this council punches above its weight by providing excellent, good value for money services. £1 a week is really, really good value for this service, so I'll be supporting this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine really is just a comparison as to how good the value is of this contract. I spend a lot of time in Lancashire, and where I stay, the council there, when they first introduced a charge for their green waste, it was £120 a year to have your waste taken twice a month. They've since reduced that to £60 per year, but they've also reduced the collections to once a month. So I think £50 for a 2-weekly collection is excellent value. That was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rule.
Yeah, just a couple of questions.
Can you put the mic on, please?
Sorry.
Just a couple of quick questions. One's quite practical. And you might have answered these in your workshop, so forgive me if you have and I haven't heard. Just if you're in a row of terraces, or if you're two elderly people side by side and you want to share the use of a green bin, is there any way we can facilitate that, or would that have to be via informal arrangement between neighbours? So if say for example you've got, I know in my row we've got 3 terraces, we might only need 1 bin, can we split that charge, or have we got to do that between us?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it would be through informal arrangement. We would have a contract with one person paying for the bin. If those 2 neighbours then wish to share that bin, that's their prerogative.
Okay, thank you. The other just point of reference really was that in EAM, through the grants that we provide as councillors, I've helped to fund a village compost, and I wondered if we could explore the possibility through our environmental work, looking at developing more localised composting sites that would help with this process, so that people who haven't got cars or can't go such long distances to use some of the main depots.
Ash.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if members are aware of community groups or residents that wish to have information or talk about composting, then we'll certainly provide that advice.
Thank you.
Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pay tribute to the work our officers have done on this. I'll be supporting the recommendation as set out in the report, and also I would like a recorded vote, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does that find a seconder? Thank you very much. It will be a recorded vote. Councillor Swindell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points I'd like to make on this. 8 years ago, we went through this process. was a fairly newish councillor then, and it all seemed straightforward, and it went horribly wrong, particularly in my ward. I know some other wards, similar sort of makeups, Tideswell and Yulgrave, with nooks and crannies and various roads firing off in all directions. Things went badly wrong. I had people without a bin collection for 6 weeks. Some people with 10 bins on their yard. It was horrendous. So I just want to start by saying that to Ash and his team, they've gone through a process that's been far more rigorous, and I'm sure that speaking with potential bidders, they've been through a much more thorough process of letting them know what is involved. It wasn't the fault of our council 8 years ago. It was a contractor, I think, took on something that was a bit more than they could deal with. So I'm going forward with this with a positive view that this is going to be very good. And the reason I do is because we've got to look at it positively. I see elements of what Councillor Ratcliffe is saying. You know, this is a situation that we're in. We've got to deal with it. We need a waste contract. We've got the financial situation that we've got, and we've got to look positively at it. And I'm trying to do that because I was somebody who was sceptical, but like Councillor Burford, I've changed my mind, but perhaps more that this is a good thing. And I say that because this system isn't changing a great deal at all. We're just introducing a charge for the green waste collection, and that is something I really welcome, because we haven't got to have delivery of new containers, we haven't got to re-educate everybody on what to do with those containers again. So this is almost a continuation of what we've got, which was the big problem before we introduced a huge change, which was real complication for us to deal with as a council and for residents to get their head around. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, that I think that should be really welcome, and nobody's going to get an additional bin on their yard, which they've got to try and accommodate. I did have concerns about the fly tipping element. I did. But I tried to look at it in the other way round. I was talking to a lot of people. Graham's been doing the same about this. And people were saying, yes, it's a shame we've got to now pay for the garden waste collection. But they wanted to keep the fortnightly residual waste collection. That was more important to the majority of people. I've only got one child and our residual waste bin is full, and we're avid recyclers. So how others go on with a free weekly collection, I wouldn't know. Well, my point here is that fly tipping is more likely to happen with a 3 weekly residual collection than it is with a charge for green waste collection, in my opinion. And if somebody did happen to fly tip and chuck a load of yard trimmings and lawn cuttings on the side of Elton Moor, I would rather see that than residual waste spilt out everywhere. So I'm trying to look at it positively. I do agree as well that £1 a week is not a lot to ask our residents to pay. And again, I understand, Councillor Ratcliffe, it's another charge for some people. I totally get that. But people can opt out of this. It's not a mandatory thing. It is not an opt-in. It is an you opt into it. It's not an opt-out. So nobody is going to suddenly come across a charge that they don't want. And I'm trying to think of the other point, Chair, but I think that basically sums it up. But on the whole, I think we've got to look at this positively, and I think this is the best outcome that we could have, and I congratulate the officers for it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take up the possibility of what may happen from an environmental point of view. Yeah, sure. If this green waste, if people opt out of bins, yeah, there will be people who will try to dump it, to put it in other containers. But unlike Councillor Burford, I've got more confidence in the social responsibility of Derbyshire Dales residents, and I think the majority will. If they do opt out, they will actually find means of disposing. But I'd like to use as an example, I'll use my own village as an example of why this charge is not excessive, is not unreasonable. My village is a rural village. It's small village. I've done a rough count, and I would say we've got between 80 to 100 green bins collected from our village twice monthly. Collected by one lorry going down our one street. That's one vehicle collects all those. Right, let's take the scenario that if everyone opted out of the green bin system. Our nearest recycling centre is 6 miles away, so that's a 12 miles round trip. Twice a month, that's 25 miles. Average car will cost you, what, £3 to do that? So there's that cost. Also, take that again to the ultimate scenario. Those 100 bins would generate 1,200 extra miles every 2 weeks. And for a tiny village like Chelmorton, that would mean 30,000 extra car miles per year. I know it's an ultimate scenario, but we're a very small village. Multiply that up to what might happen in bigger towns, and what you've got is a huge increase in carbon dioxide emissions through greater transport use, personal trips. I just can't see how this compares. We've got a good system, and I fully support.
Thank you. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. I've taken a great amount of time considering all the aspects of this new waste contract. I thank the officers. They've put to get the best deal they possible. If local authorities, for all the time they've put into and could raise more, if local authorities could raise more money from council tax cap being altered, or the government grants for waste would help. But there seems little chance of this, local authorities at this time. So we have to make an hard decision. I've spoken with many local residents at my charity plant stores in Worksworth, and the great view is that residents would like to see the present waste collection continue as it is now. If payments are needed for green waste to keep this present collection system in 2 weeks, weekly, the view is that they would pay the £50. Then rather than go to a 3-week general waste collection. Some council have suggested that changes could be linked to council tax payment bans. I believe this would be unfair to residents of flats and apartments where there is no green waste to be collected. So I agree with the officers that a standard payment across the board would be more workable. Varying payments would be very difficult to handle, so I agree with the officers on this. As we know, green waste collection is not a statutory order like the other collections. I was first critical of the DDC workshops of the waste collection in charging for green waste, as it could lead to fly tipping. Looking deeply into this, I now believe that this would not be a serious problem. The reasons: number one, if we had no green waste, if you have no green waste bin, you need to easily take your waste to the recycling centres at Ashburn and Darley-Dale, to the DDC refuse site, free of charge, than tip green waste and face prosecution. Number two, to get composters in your garden. Waste makes good compost and for your garden. If you're still available from the council, composters at a fair price, this would be a good idea for the officers to put this out to the public. Also leaflets put out to the public about composting to be given out. And just to consider, I do agree with the officers, this is the best way to go with the waste collection in this position financially. And regarding financially, I think we've seen the austerity of many years, as Councillor Ratcliffe has already said, has brought this council to this position, and the officers have done an excellent job in getting this contract, and I will support this officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Salt.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to praise the officers, they've had far too much praise this evening. I just want to pick up on a few points that have come up already. Neighbour disputes, I don't know what's happening on the estate that Councillor Burfoot lives on since I grew up there, but it must be a rough place if you're going to fall out over a bin. Certainly in our village, the people I've spoken to have already adopted a collaborative approach and said, we'll share a bin between 3 houses. And I certainly, if I put my bin out half empty, I It wouldn't bother me if anybody went and filled it up. Fly tipping is an argument I just can't buy into. You don't see garden waste fly tipped very often, if at all. The reason being you can just take it to a recycling centre for nothing. Fly tipping consists of trade waste that can't be got rid of, in the main. I think if anybody's going to get in the car with a boot full of clippings and go and toss them at the side of the road, they'll just as easily take them to a recycling centre and deal with them there. Council tax, again, it's an inequitable system to raise council tax. You're asking people who don't have gardens or don't have a need for garden waste to pay for those that do, and in a referendum you'll just face a situation where all those who are about to get it 30 quid cheaper will go out and vote. The others won't vote in the same numbers, I would suspect, and you'll end up with the council tax perhaps going through and everybody paying 20 quid extra. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's certainly not a fair and equitable system in this day and age. I think the £1 a week represents the best value and the best option that we have for Derbyshire Dales, and I fully support it.
Thank you. Councillor Flitter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll just add my support to the officers because they have had a humongous job here. With great difficulty they've come to a conclusion. Sadly, it's one that I can't support wholeheartedly. The thing, I mean, what I do agree with Councillor Purdy is that, you know, we are told by umpteen, or sometimes hundreds of residents, that the ordinary man on the street gets very, very little from their council tax, and this is yet another burden. And it's all right saying, yes, but we know we do a lot more, but what do we do for that chap down the street that doesn't benefit from anything else that we do? And the misnomer that is going around, this is £1 a week, it's £2 a collection. You're only going fortnightly, it's £2 a collection. But it sounds better from the other side, I suppose, that it's £1 a week. And I can't buy into this argument where we're not fly tipping, because every councillor in this room will know of an area in their ward that suffers from fly tipping. And I know that. I go to a parish council quite close to here, and on their moorland, yes, they regularly get fly tipping, and it worsens every single month. When we talk about the level of cost, we look at people in need, people on low incomes, and I looked a bit further, because every time a council wishes to save money, they lower the criteria for that benefit. And there are a lot of people now that fall above that breadline of claiming any benefits, and they are really, really struggling. And this is just an add-on to that. And when we admit in a report or that if we had a referendum, we wouldn't get the result we want, that's flying in the face of our residents, because we're turning round to them and saying, well, we're doing this anyway. And another misnomer, in my opinion, is that, okay, and I take on Karen's point of view with the council tax figures, and I don't disagree with those, but we have a certain amount of money in our budget, and it's priorities on how we spend it. So to say that this one thing will cost us 9% in the raising of council tax, there are other things that you may not wish to do, and it's all a matter of priorities. And people will look at it this way. I can support the motion in 4 of the 5 areas and recommendations, but charging I cannot support, and so that means that I shall not be supporting the motion, because I don't believe that's the right way to go. I think we've not given enough thought to people out there that are struggling, and they will fly tip, and we seem to ignore that every time we talk about waste contracts. And I also want to say, just think, we've thanked the officers, just think of the councillors that have been here since pre-May. We've been dealing with this issue for nearly as long as we've been dealing with Brexit. And now what conclusion have we got? Sorry, I can't support it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Morley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was very disappointed to hear that comment there, that there is fly tipping in every ward. There certainly is no fly tipping in my ward, and I think it's a very unkind allegation to make to the people of the Derbyshire Dales, that they fly tip as a default. I wouldn't ask you to retract it, but I'd certainly question that statement.
Councillor Pawley, please.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the officers and all fellow councillors for all the massive amount of work we've done to try and get to this point, and I will support it. I want to come off the green waste and talk about the change from black bags to bins and have a little bit more information on that, if you wouldn't mind, Ash. Can you tell me when that will start? Will it be the August 21? And will the bins that be provided be free? And what kind of percentage change do you think it will be?
Thank you, Chair. We want that work to start as soon as possible. We said to all bidders that we would like a commitment to reduce the number of properties that are on sacks and move to bins where possible. It's very difficult at this stage to say what percentage that will be, but each property in turn will be reviewed. Having the contractor continuing with a new contract may speed up the process, but at the very latest we would expect that to start with the new contract coming in, and if we are able to transfer a property from a sack collection to a bin collection, we wouldn't charge for that.
Could I just...
Yeah.
Could you tell me if somebody is up a very steep flight of steps on a hillside, like a lot of our villages have got, and they request help getting that bin down to the bottom, even if they're not disabled or very elderly, but just feel that they might hurt themselves if they do it, if we would take that into account, or would that be a null point?
It's very much each property on its own merit, so Sally and her team will review the situation and make a decision based upon that. Where possible, we do ask other neighbours to help out, but we do accept there are circumstances where some residents don't have support and do struggle, and we deal with those appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. We had a meeting yesterday with Ash and Steve, which was really informative. I just wanted to confirm something that was mentioned to us yesterday, was that possibly, depending on the take-up of the green bins, they will be on different rounds on different days.
Yes, that's correct. There's the potential for that. Depending on the uptake, as you quite rightly say, that will help determine the number of properties on those rounds, and then they'll look at what's referred to as route optimisation. So we're not doing unnecessary, or the contractor's not doing unnecessary mileage. So yes, there is the potential for green waste to be collected on a different day, but until we've gone through that process, it's hard to say what that will be at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeman.
I would like to thank the officers for a good report, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sue Burford.
Thank you, Chair. Could I first of all say that I think we all know that this service is absolutely vital for any district council, and I know there were some teething problems with Serco, but certainly as far as we're concerned, where we live, the service has been really, really good, and that includes the operatives, who I have to say do their job very efficiently. You're probably going to think that I am going to say something not negative really. It's not. I'm not trying to be negative, but we've just been through a very bruising general election, and some of us are obviously very disappointed with the outcome. I think what's happened here is, with lots of other issues that have come in front of the district council in terms of finances, is that we've put our officers in an impossible position. They've done an excellent job in impossible circumstances, and those circumstances are because of austerity for the last whatever number of years, and I can't see an end to it. So I think this is going to carry on, and we're going to be in this position. We're going to ask our officers to do impossible tasks. I had my problem with the recommendation is this £50. I had really hoped that it would be less than that. I think our council taxpayers are going to say to themselves, we pay council tax and now we're being asked for a bit more. And it's all right to say, oh, it's only £1 a week, but as I think it was Steve who said, that's £1 a week on top of everything else that we're being asked to pay. And £1 a week to most of us is nothing, and we'll get a good service for that £1 a week. But if it is a regressive sort of tax, this, and if you are on benefit, some people are being asked to live on £60 a week. Most of us in this room have got no idea what that could be like, no idea whatsoever. But there are people who are living on very low income. So what are we expecting them to do with their, they may be on a they may have, we can't assume everybody who's on a low income hasn't got a garden. They will have gardens. So, generally, as a sort of general point, it's just not fair. And I'm really struggling knowing what to do, because I cannot go along with this £50. But as I say, the officers have done their very best, and they've been forced into this situation. And I'm afraid our councillors opposite will go along with it, because that seems to be the way that the Conservatives operate.
Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as somebody who's sat through the last contract 8 years ago, I think that you look down the line, looking 8 years down the line, we've got to bear in mind the inevitable cost implied. But at the same time, I also think that it is value for money, and I think the officers have done a fantastic job to get this package here, and I will be supporting it.
Councillor Bull, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I, along with others, will be supporting this. And the other thing is, as members are saying, it's not all going on the council tax as you actually wanted to put it there. It's an opt-in. So if you don't want to do it, you don't pay that extra. You're paying the council tax for what we've already do the services for. And it's just unfortunate that in the last 8 years that this council has actually done things, numerous things, that were not under the statutory duty to do. And we give that service to the public, and now it's a service that it's there. We don't have to give it, but we're offering it because it's already in there, and if they have to use it this time, then they have to pay for it.
Thank you very much. I've got nobody else on my list now. We have the councillor. I was going to get everyone a second chance and give us very quickly, please.
This afternoon I asked Ash about what Amber Valley run a 8-month collection of green waste, and I asked Ash, and I suggested that in that 4 months of the winter there's hardly any green waste except at Christmas time, Christmas trees. Ash said these vehicles would have to operate all year round. So I thought this afternoon vehicles will be actually travelling about using carbon, burning carbon, and carrying very little. I think this isn't a good way of working, really, if we're going to address climate change. We can't have vehicles running about with hardly anything on them, really. So I think we should look at this again in midwinter and maybe
just stand a bit, it'd be better all round, probably. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. We have moved to a recorded vote. Members, please, so I'll ask Jackie to do the recorded vote. Please talk clearly when you give your vote, please. Jackie.
Councillor Allison. Against. Archer.
Abstention.
Atkin.
For.
Bright.
For.
Butler.
For.
Bull. For. Martin Barefoot.
Against.
Sue Barefoot.
Just needs abstention, thank you.
Chapman.
For.
Donnelly.
For.
Elliott.
For.
Fitzherbert.
For.
Flitter.
Abstain.
Froggatt.
For.
Furness.
For.
Gamble.
Abstain.
Hill.
For.
Hobson.
For.
Lees.
For.
McDonough.
For.
Anthony Morley.
For.
Michelle Morley.
For.
Pawley.
For.
Purdy.
For.
Ratcliffe.
For.
Raw.
For.
Salt.
For.
Slack.
For.
Statham.
For.
Sutton.
For.
Swindle.
For.
Wayne.
For.
Wakeman.
For.
So what was the totals, please?
27 in favour, 2 against and 4 abstentions.
So the motion is carried. Members, thank you very much for that. Thank you once again to the officers. Thank you for a cracking job. We wish you all a very happy Christmas. See you back here on the 16th of January. Good night.
What about my own job?